Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's lesson is entitled The Mercy of God's Justice, and is taken from Samuel, 2 Samuel, the 9th chapter. Is verses 1 through 13. So there are 13 verses in the 9th chapter of 2 Samuel. And this is a story. This is a simple story of grace, a simple story of showing kindness or grace. And this is a story about David, who was a king at the time, David and Mephibosheth. Now, in this particular story here, it's a story about David showing kindness to Mephibosheth. Now, let's read, let's begin reading in the first verse of this 9th chapter of 2 Samuel here. And David said, "Is there yet any that is left in the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now, let's stop there. We know Jonathan was the son of Saul, King Saul. And Jonathan and David had a very unique friendship, a love for each other. And we know that David became king after Saul, okay? So now, and what happens generally when one king take over, the other king's descendants generally become enemies of the new administration. So, so the question that is raised in verse 1 of this 9th chapter, David asks, "Is there anyone in the house of Saul that I may show kindness to for Jonathan's sake, for my friend's sake?" Okay, and verse 2 comes and says, "And there was of the house of Saul a servant whose name was Ziba. And when they call him unto David, the king, David the king said unto him, Art thou Ziba? And he said, Thou servant is he." Okay, yes, that's basically what he said. And the king said unto him, and David said unto him, "Is there not yet any of the house of Saul that I may show kindness of God unto?" And Ziba said unto the king, "Jonathan," that is your friend, "Jonathan has yet a son which is lame on his feet." In other words, the king's servant says, "Yes, by the way, Jonathan has a son, but he is a cripple. He's lame." Now, let's stop right there. Now, this son, we're going to get to his name, is Mephibosheth, but this son of Jonathan, who's lame, he wasn't born that way, okay? As we go back to the 4th chapter of 2 Samuel, we'll find out that after David had taken over, and actually the servant, Mephibosheth, was about 5 years old at the time, and they had to flee, and the servant dropped him, and he became lame in both feet, okay? So it was an accident that he became a cripple, but he is actually he is Saul's grandson, that is, he's Jonathan's son, Jonathan was Saul's son. So that would make Mephibosheth a grandson of King Saul. Okay, and verse 4, and the king said unto him, that is a servant, where is he? Where is this descendant, this son of Jonathan? He said, where is he? And Ziba said unto the king, behold, he is in the house of Michal, the son of Amiel, in Lodebar. Now, Lodebar was a desert place. So he was in a remote location. He was in Lodebar. It was nothing, basically. And this Mephibosheth, he was basically considered, even though he was a potential challenger to the throne because he was a descendant of Saul, but he was like an outcast. In other words, they said, well, you don't even have to worry about Mephibosheth because he's a cripple anyway. He don't measure up. And now, one thing about it, this lesson, we are a type of Mephibosheth as well, because we did not measure up either. Whereas Mephibosheth was a physical cripple, we were a spiritual cripple before the grace of God. Okay, and we're going to see in this lesson how we are a type of Mephibosheth because we didn't measure up to God's standards. So, so basically they say, well, this son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth, he don't measure up. He's a crippled. Yeah, we were crippled also. We were spiritually crippled. We didn't measure up to God's standard either, but for the grace of God. Okay, let's go to verse 5 here. Then King David sent and fetched him out of the house of Machir and the son of Amiel from Lodebar. And basically, when David found out, yes, there is a descendant of Jonathan. Jonathan has a son, as I said, but he's a cripple though. You know, he's really a nobody. He's a cripple. And verse 5, David said, well, go get him, go fetch him, go bring him to me in Jerusalem. Now, remember, he's in Lodebar, a no-name place, a desert. He said, bring him to me here in Jerusalem. And then verse 6, now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, and it was Saul's grandson, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, behold, thy servant. Now, as I said earlier, when Mephibosheth was dropped and became a physical crippled, he was about 5 years old. That's back in the 4th chapter of the 2nd Samuel. Now Mephibosheth is now an adult. It's about 20 years later. So Mephibosheth he's a full-grown man. He's about 25 years old or something, but he's still a cripple. Basically, he's still a cripple. Let's go to 7. And David said unto him, fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan's sake, for Jonathan thy father's sake. Now, as I said earlier, when David said, fear not, okay, Mephibosheth was thinking, now they have found me in Lodebar, and surely I'm going to be put to death. So Mephibosheth is thinking, they're going to kill me, okay? And so this is why David said in verse 7, fear not, I'm not going to take your life. So, and this is the thing. We all should want the Mephibosheth blessing. he was thinking the worst was going to happen to him, but we're going to see what he did receive. He didn't get what he expected. He expected, because he was a potential potential heir to the throne. Because as I said, this Mephibosheth was Saul's grandson. Okay, so he was a potential candidate. But as I said, they didn't really think much of him because he was a physical cripple. He didn't measure up. And as I said, neither did we. Okay, so let's continue with verse 7. So David said unto him, fear not, don't be afraid. I'm not going to take your life, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan, thy father's sake, and I will restore. Listen to this. I will restore thee all the land of Saul, thy father, his grandfather. And thou shalt eat bread at my table continually. Now, this phrase here, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually, this is the first time it's mentioned here, but it's actually mentioned 3 more times. So this phrase is mentioned 4 times in this story. It's mentioned here. First, I'm going to restore all the land of thy fathers, of Saul, thy father. I'm going to restore that to you. And secondly, you're going to eat bread at my table continually forever. Okay, let's go to verse 8. And he bowed himself and said, what is thy servant that thou shalt lookest upon such a dead dog as I am? So basically, Mephibosheth is saying, well, I don't even measure up in no kind of way. And why are you showing me this kindness? That's why I said we all should want the Mephibosheth blessing. Whereas we think we getting something inferior, and it's just the opposite. He thought he was going to be put to death, but he is going to be blessed tremendously. He's going to eat at the king's table continually. Let's go verse 9 here. Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said unto him, I have given unto thy master's son all that pertaineth to Saul and to all his house. In other words, he's like made a governor. He's restored. He getting a blessing that he clearly did not expect. And verse 10, thou therefore and thy sons and thy servant shall till the land for him. And thou shalt bring in the fruits, that thy master's son may have food to eat, but Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread always at my table. Now, basically, there's it again. He's mentioning again. Thy master's son shall eat bread always at my table. And we go to verse 11 here. And I like the phrase that they use here. Then said Ziba unto the king, according to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servants do. Whatever you said, we're going to do it. For as Mephibosheth said the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons. So now, if you go to someone's house for a dinner, for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, perhaps, you go as a visitor or as a guest. So the king is saying, Mephibosheth shall eat at my table continually, not as a guest. But in verse 10 says, shall eat always at my table as as one of the king's son, not as a guest. You're not going to be, going to be part of the family. You're going to eat at my table forever as a son, not as a guest. Okay, as I said, the Mephibosheth blessing, we all should want that. And now, okay, verse 12. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Machir. And all that dwelled in his house of Ziba were servants unto Mephibosheth. So as I said before, now Mephibosheth was an adult. He even had a son himself. So he was no longer the 5-year-old that was dropped, okay, and became a cripple. As I say, he's still a cripple, but he is blessed beyond measure. And let's go to verse 13. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he did eat continually at the king's table, and he was lame on both his feet. So that is the fourth time the king is mentioned. He's going to eat at my table continually. And it also tells us that he remained in Jerusalem. Remember, he was in Lodabar, and he was brought to Jerusalem, and he dwelt there in the king's house, ate at his table continued as a guest. And as I said earlier, that is a great store of grace extended, whereas Mephibosheth was a physical cripple. We were a spiritual cripple. So we were like a Mephibosheth before God's grace. And the scripture said we all came short of the glory of God, but for the grace of God. And this story here is a story of grace, the blessing of Mephibosheth, the favor of God, and we should all want that. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.